So Billy Joel's song, The River of Dreams, says in the first stanza, in the middle of the night, I go walking in my sleep, from the mountains of faith to the rivers so deep. I must be looking for something sacred I lost, but the river is wide and it's too hard to cross. And later he talks about he's been searching for something taken out of my soul, something I'd never lose, something somebody stole. Um, I resonated with that. Um, so I'd like to tell you I'm just going to speak from the heart today, and I think it will be from the heart, but I'm going to read a little bit. Um, I'm certain of nothing lately, and I'm not sure that that state is entirely new. Kathleen Dowling Singh says in her book, The Grace in Aging, that of course we're insecure. We're making it all up. So Joe's talk last week about seeing and surrender and healing, and yesterday's Four Noble Truths set the stage for what I want to say today about painful emotions and mental patterns, specifically fear. I know I've stumbled on this particular rock before, but never in the way that I have recently. And isn't that the way it is? We see, we forget, we see again, it feels new, and then we forget, and then we see, and on and on. So most of you know that my husband and I have been involved in the process of prepping our house and getting it really ready to sell it and then looking for a new home. And this process has been a wonderful teacher, but that fierce grace that Joe talks about. The good news is that we're moving into our new home in 2 weeks. If you're a student of the Enneagram, you know that the one pattern tends to control and judge everything. And when things don't go as expected, they become angry. The changes of the last year were fertile soil for these patterns to emerge. Sometimes I could spot them right away, but others they spun in well-worn grooves in my brain until Grace would tap me on the shoulder and say, wake up. So my practice has never been more necessary because even in the deep, high weeds of suffering, I always had that. Reading, meditation, and journaling helped me sort through my suffering and see the truth. I suffered too because I've been at this for 20 years and I have to ask the question that Tom asked yesterday, is this doing any good? As confident as I feel in the morning in my sacred space, sometimes it just falls apart later. The big stick comes out, I give myself a good talking to and go on, expecting things to be different, to suffer less and cause less suffering. Then I read in The Grace in Aging that striving to awaken is the action of self-cherishing and will keep us trapped. Ego's strategies are incapable of moving beyond ego. Ego's strategies are incapable of moving beyond ego. I really took that in, and I realized that the desire to be a better person keeps me stuck in the same old patterns. So meanwhile, as we moved toward actually putting our house on the market, things really ratcheted up for me. I began having what I called the nighttime ickies. Long about 5 p.m., pretty much every day, things started to feel off. That sense that something is not right. Mental patterns told me that either I was wrong, someone else was wrong, sometimes everything was wrong. It all felt so hopeless. So TV distracts me well enough until I go to bed, and in that quiet, things really get hairy. So one night, I tried breathing with one hand on my heart, one hand on my belly, and then doing a body scan. I realized what I was feeling was fear. The feeling didn't go away, but I began to feel some softening around it, tenderness even. It was pretty easy to identify what I was afraid of on the surface, change. financial loss, the physical challenges, conflict with Richard, all first world fears that I told myself I had no right to feel. I started reading about fear, mainly in Buddhist publications, and there's a lot of articles by many of the teachers that I follow. What I learned affirmed my experience. Everyone feels fear. Several articles cited scientists that say that fear is written into the cellular memory of our bodies. But fear has a purpose. Sometimes it keeps us safe and away from danger, or it can spark us to necessary action. But fear is physically and emotionally uncomfortable, and most people avoid it at all costs. Public speaking is one of the fears most often named in these articles, right up there with death. Ezra Beta said, a friend of his said that most people with this fear would rather at their funeral would rather be the one in the coffin instead of the one giving the eulogy. But most of us don't talk about fear. I brought this up with several friends recently, and all were incredulous that I was afraid, and none would admit to their own fear more than just occasionally. No one wanted to admit that they are afraid when there isn't a good reason to be afraid. So I continued working with fear, and one night I remembered I used to feel this way often as a child. Maybe it's the reason I used a child's word, icky, to describe the experience. Journaling about this the next day, I learned my fear does not want to be seen, and it does not want other people to see it. What I saw was a child's fear. Fear of things that go bump in the night, bad dreams, being left alone, not being loved. But I'm not a child now. I'm not afraid of those things in any real way. But what I saw was that this child's fear is the emotional engine that powers control, judgment, and anger. It feeds the mental patterns that fuel them. And seeing this was a real eureka moment. So now I try to work with fears that arises on the spot with varying degrees of success. But I breathe it into the center of my chest, remembering that we are all members of the OFS, the Order of Fellow Sufferers. Tending to my fear keeps it from triggering a thought pattern about why I feel this way, who is to blame, and what I can do to fix it. Instead, I can ask Joe's question of where does this lead? And I don't know is always my answer. But one day journaling, this came instead. I asked for courage to keep going, patience when I fail, compassion when it hurts. So that might be enough about fear. But before we meditate, I just wanted to highlight the three aspects of my practice that have been really helpful to me, those things that help me keep one toe on the path, as Rebecca says. My formal practice is first thing in the morning. I grab a cup of tea and I come upstairs to read and meditate and journal. Your formal practice might be another time of day and it might look completely different. The important thing is to start and do what you can do, 10, 15 minutes, and then keep doing it. But let go of all the judgment about this process, including judgment about not doing it at all. So I have a dedicated space for my formal practice in an office that Richard and I share. My cushion and altar were in a closet until I had to pack them up. The realtor told me nothing turns potential buyers off like a Buddhist shrine. She's Buddhist, by the way. Now my altar is a box with a few photos and a couple of candles. So an altar with sacred reminders is an important part of my practice. It's a way in when stillness eludes me on the cushion. Finally, prayer. And I struggled with whether or not to include this because I wouldn't presume to tell anyone in this group how to pray or even to pray. But I'll share that I was surprised by the role this took in my practice once I opened the door. I struggled for years with who I was praying to, if prayer worked, my worthiness to pray. Resistance in pants, as Joe says. So a while back, I read a book called The Magic of Vajrayana by Ken McLeod. He's one of the early Western Buddhist teachers. And he talks about prayer and faith in a book full of visualizations of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Kind of blew my mind. But Ken says prayer is a leap of faith. It is letting go of control. That idea really called to me. He also says faith is a way into another kind of knowing. We cultivate faith through practice and prayer. This helps form a relationship with knowing that does not depend on the conceptual mind. We cultivate faith through practice and prayer. This helps form a relationship with knowing that does not depend on the conceptual mind. Years back, I thought faith meant certainty, but now I know that doubt and uncertainty are part of faith. What do I believe? This is all part of the path. What is supposed to happen will happen, with my acquiescence or not. I want to move into the flow of it, yield to it, join forces with it.